Hey, before we start, I've got two brand new Patreon supporters I want to thank. Joe Lavarini and Ellie Gage. Both Joe and Ellie signed up via Patreon, which is monthly support. And there are a lot of different benefits that come with Patreon. You can go to the website to see all that. But one of them is a monthly video / behind the scenes newsletter that I put out. And since it's coming up to be the end of the month, I'm going to be working on that next week. So thank you to everybody who supports, no matter how much, how often. It all makes a really, really big difference, and it is the reason that I've been able to expand the podcast and grow the podcast. So thank you, thank you, thank you very much. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. This episode's a little bit different than normal. It is actually me being interviewed by my friend and past Mountain Prairie podcast guest, Kate Kavanaugh. If you've been listening to Mountain Prairie for a while, then I'm sure you remember Kate. She's a farmer, butcher, and all-around interesting woman who co-founded Western Daughters Butcher Shop in Denver. Kate recently started her own podcast, and it's called Groundwork, and it covers a variety of interesting topics, from soil to health to books to intentional living. Kate is unbelievably smart and insightful, and there's a ton of overlap between what I'm doing at Mountain Prairie and what she's doing with Groundwork. So I encourage you to check out all of her podcast episodes. There's a link in the episode notes. So even though I'm still confused as to why anybody would ever want to interview me, Kate did, and we had a really fun conversation about everything from conservation to ultra running, from reading to starting a podcast. We also talk a lot about my obsession with living what Theodore Roosevelt called the strenuous life, and how my adopting that approach to life has been very, very life-changing and influential for me. And speaking of the strenuous life, I just launched a new section on mountainprairie.com devoted to the strenuous life and offering up ways for the Mountain Prairie community to connect and collaborate in the spirit of what TR called living strenuously. Rather than try to explain it here off the cuff and mumble and stutter, I'm going to read a short essay from the webpage that explains what the strenuous life means to me, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about all the ways that the Mountain Prairie community can connect virtually as a group to push ourselves both physically and mentally. So here we go. Here's the essay. Back in 2009, I began leafing through my copy of Edmund Morris's Pulitzer Prize-winning masterpiece, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. The book had been sitting unread on my shelf for nearly a decade, but for some reason on that particular day, I decided to read a few pages. Within minutes, I was wrapped, completely locked in on the life story of pre-presidential TR. What captured my attention was not the well-known laundry list of TR's accomplishments as a young man. War hero, police commissioner, government reformer, cowboy, governor, naturalist. Yes, all those specifics were impressive, but I was much more mesmerized by his operating system, his commitment to pushing himself as hard as possible, both physically and mentally, on a daily basis over a very long period of time. He would eventually put a name to his operating system, famously calling it the strenuous life. He exercised hard. He read voraciously, usually a book a day. He ran when most would choose to walk. He worked with extreme focus and intensity, but not so much that he burned himself out. He attacked each day's task with enthusiasm and vigor, but not in a manic or crazed manner. When he slept, he slept. When he worked, he worked. And when he was with his kids, he was the best father he could be. Deliberate, single-minded, energetic effort, day after day, year after year. And he loved it. I remember thinking, what if I approached my days with just 5% of TR's effort? I wonder what I could accomplish. And at that very moment, I began trying to emulate TR's commitment to the strenuous life, his daily dedication to energetic and focused, yet sustainable, effort in all things. My adoption of the strenuous life mentality was a life-changing shift and led to a number of professional and personal accomplishments. But the pride of achieving certain goals pales in comparison to the deep contentment and fulfillment that the process of living strenuously has brought me. To state it simply, when I'm living strenuously, I'm content. Yes, I'm tired at the end of the day. Yes, it takes effort to attack my tasks when part of me would rather be sitting around watching YouTube. Getting up early is extremely challenging. Foregoing booze and desserts can create awkwardness in certain social situations. Lacing up my running shoes can seem like a Herculean task. And in the moment, going to sleep pretty much always seems preferable to reading. But as Rich Roll says, mood follows action. 99% of the time, when I do summon the energy to approach my day with a strenuous mentality, I'm thankful I did. I'm content. And for the moment at least, I'm happy. I can go to sleep proud of myself with the momentum to make tomorrow equally as positive. And perhaps most importantly, my family is happier because they're the ones that have to deal with me on a daily basis. What I've learned through many trials and many errors is that, for me at least, the purpose of living strenuously is not to accomplish audacious professional or athletic goals, or to check all the junk off my never-ending to-do list, or to try and be some kind of workaholic, show-off, or wannabe tough guy. The purpose is to approach each day, each hour, with enthusiastic, focused, consistent, and single-minded effort, because a commitment to the process of living strenuously is the most surefire way I've found to make myself consistently content. The purpose is the process. I have no idea if a commitment to the strenuous life will work for you, but it's definitely worked for me. I wish I'd discovered and committed to it back when I was a teenager, but better late than never. If you'd like to join me in my daily pursuits of consistent physical and mental vigor, I'd love to have you along for the ride. So that's the essay. And so there are 3 different ways that you, the listener, can get involved if you want to. Number 1 is through physical effort, and that is through Strava, which I used to be completely against Strava. I've had it for a long time, but I always kept it private because I thought it was kind of weird displaying your goals to me, even though I'm really slow. Something about it seems kind of braggadocious. But I opened my Strava up. I started a Mountain Prairie club, and every Sunday night I'm going to put a new physical challenge on that Mountain Prairie Strava club. And some of them are going to be kind of normal. Like this week, it was run for 200 minutes or ride a bike for 200 minutes and do some weight training exercises. And then other times there's going to be some really weird, funny stuff on there, but all in the spirit of consistent, focused, not over the top, not trying to be hardcore, not trying to be a tough guy, just consistent, strenuous activity on a daily and weekly basis. Second, for mental effort, I started, or I should say restarted, the Mountain Prairie Book Club on Goodreads. So there's a link in the notes to that as well. The first book we're reading is American Zion by Betsy Gaines Quammen, who was a recent podcast guest. And I'm going to be putting some questions up on the Goodreads webpage here pretty soon to kind of generate some discussion and get that going. So hopefully that'll give you some structure for your reading, if reading is your thing. And third is in person. This September at the Zapata Ranch, which is managed by Ranchlands, I'm doing the first annual Strenuous Life Retreat. It's 5 days of mountain climbing, horseback riding, exercise, reading, talking with some of the West's most foremost experts in conservation. It's really my dream come true. Unfortunately, that one is sold out. It's sold out pretty quickly, which blew my mind. But I think we're going to be doing it every year and maybe even more than once a year in the future. So keep your ears open for announcements on that. If we do it again, I would imagine we'll be announcing it in late fall of 2022. So those are the 3 ways that you can connect with me, with other Mountain Prairie listeners in our mutual shared love of the strenuous life. I'm not saying that it is a life hack or it's the kind of thing where if you start adopting the strenuous life, all your problems are going to go away. But for me, it truly is a life-changing approach to everything. And so hopefully it'll be the same for you. One other note on the new webpage, if you go all the way down the bottom, there are some Strenuous Life resources, a lot of book recommendations, and then some various video recommendations. And I'm going to keep adding to that list over and over and over. So there's a link in the episode notes to this webpage that has all the info on it, as well as the essay I just read. You can go to mountainprairie.com/strenuous-life, and that'll take you there. Hopefully, I will see some of you on Strava and or Goodreads and or in person at the Zapata Ranch this September. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoy this episode with Kate.
Howdy, I'm Kate Kavanaugh, and you're listening to the Groundwork Podcast. This begins an exploration of connectedness, looking at our own nature through the lens of nature. Mind, body, and soil. Hey everyone. I am so excited to bring you the first episode of the Groundwork Podcast with a guest, and whew, is it a good one. I want to share a little bit about what's going through my mind right now, which is that I have waited until the absolute 11th hour to record this introduction. And it's because I feel like I can't do justice to the absolute wisdom that is in this episode. And I was thinking about what it means to sit down with people that you deeply admire and respect. And I've been really lucky in my life to get to do that quite a few times, and to get to receive in return from another human exactly what you need to hear in the exact moment that you need to hear it. That true soul medicine. And when I sat down with Ed Robertson of Mountain Prairie for this first episode of the Groundwork Podcast with a guest, that was exactly what I received. And I'm sitting here just reflecting on how difficult it's been to get this podcast out into the world for me. It's something that's been in my heart for many, many years. And I think anytime we find that thing we want to do, that work we want to put out in the world, that burning desire that we want to say, we are often met with so much resistance. Our egos come up to meet us, and they are there with every judgment and every perfectionistic tendency and I think it's perfectionist, by the way. That's how nervous I am. Every reason why we shouldn't do something. And in the past, as I've approached business, one of the things that I've said is, if you think about anything long enough, you can find a million reasons not to. But sometimes you just have to jump off that cliff, knowing that you'll be able to make a parachute out of whatever you have on you on the way down. And I did not take that advice in getting around to this podcast. And it was actually Ed that really pushed me to go after this dream. And I think for anybody who is looking to start any practice or to go on any adventure, to take any first step, this is in many ways the perfect podcast. I think that Ed has a beautiful way of making everything seem possible if you can just take that first step. And I think that his story is so inspiring, and the integrity with which he lives his life is so heartening, and it just makes you want to get up and do it. To run an ultra marathon, to start a podcast, to dive into conservation work, to live life and just squeeze every bit of juice out of it. And to do it with the sort of humility that I don't think we see very often in today's world. And so I think that's all I can say to introduce this man. And so as you're listening to this, and as I'm speaking this intro, just do the thing. Whatever it is that's in your heart right now, I can't stress enough that it is so hard to put ourselves out there, and it is so worthwhile. And so I hope this podcast episode inspires you as much as it inspired me. Without further ado, Ed Robertson.
That Tim Ferriss podcast I sent is he goes overboard with a lot of it, but like as far as his ideas about like the technology involved, he keeps it unbelievably simple. So if it may be worth a listen if you ever have questions about it.
I was going to pick that up probably on my walk today. I've been doing a lot of walking and listening to podcasts, and I'm really curious about this because you've been doing this for a long time. So I trust your opinion of what's good information and what's not.
The simpler, the better. I mean, you just don't want to, these people, I get all these emails from people all day asking like, how do I start a podcast and all that. And I used to be real nice and spend time talking with them, but I do.
Your time is valuable.
And then they do like 4 episodes and they quit. So I'm kind of like, well, the key is simple. You got to have it simple enough so that you know that it's sustainable enough to do 100 episodes. I mean, that's kind of you don't want to be, you're not NPR trying to like make This American Life, it's just, they got a crew of people. And so anyway, the simpler, the better. Maybe that's just because I'm not very smart.
You've had Mountain Prairie for 5 years?
Yeah, like 5.5, which is crazy. Yeah, 5.5. I started it in maybe April of 2015 or 2016. And I just committed to doing, in my head, I never publicly made a commitment, but like 1 episode every other week. And that's kind of what it's averaged out to. I'm doing more now because I've got some help with the editing and stuff like that. But it's, just been cranking it out. Like that's one thing I know I'm good at is not quitting. And I can grind. And so that's all I've done.
I was going to say that I feel like you hit the nail on the head. I feel like you're the king of sustainable practice. Like you're really good at building sustainable practices for yourself, whether it's podcasting or I know some of the practices that happen behind the scenes. And I always wonder how you sort of manage that.
Well, you see the end result, you see more than most because we have conversations and see, but it's a bit of a mess behind the scenes. Like I think of whether it's reading or whether it's trying to figure out, exercise routines or what I'm eating. It's like I dump like a ton of stuff into a funnel and then it all funnels through. And then maybe at the end, 50 pounds comes out that's worth, continuing with, but I'm always kind of trying stuff out and testing stuff. There's no real method to it. Before we hit record, we were talking about Tim Ferriss. It's like the opposite of Tim Ferriss. It's just kind of like throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. But I've been doing it enough for long enough now that I figure things out eventually, whether it's my exercise or what I'm eating. And I could probably be more methodical about it all, but I'm just not, I don't think. And I'm 43, almost 44. And I don't see myself making a hard turn into being Mr. Methodical here, going into middle age. So
I think we actually both share that we like to throw a lot of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And I think there's something to be said for that as a methodology. I mean, who's to say that's not methodology in and of itself? And you just get a little bit quicker at recognizing what's working when it's working. But when I think about you, I think about some of the habits you've built, especially reading. You mentioned this, reading and running. You are one of the most voracious, if not the most voracious reader that I know. And I like to read.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think of myself that way at all. But now that I've been putting out that book list, I've been doing the book list longer than I did the podcast. And I've got this email list that I send out every other month just with some of the books I've read. And
it's great. I love it.
Yeah. Well, it started out I sent it to, I think literally like 30 of my friends. And then every other month I send it out. And now the thing has got it's crazy how many people are on it. And now all these publishers are on it. Every week I'm getting advanced copies of books and that kind of thing. And so I guess I do read a lot, but I just try to kind of crank it out. And I actually think having the list and knowing that every other month I'm going to need to send out a list of books, that's accountability. Is good motivation for me. Yeah, it's accountability. It's like signing up for a race. I mean, that's the only time I'll really run consistently is when I sign up for an event. And so having that forces me to read. I mean, I think the only downside to it is I think I'm more focused on the number of books I read versus going deep. And I was telling my wife the other night, I feel like I haven't read any real deep history recently. And I've got this book about Lyndon Johnson. It's the first in a trilogy, and each one is like 1,200 pages. And I haven't started it because I'm like, that's going to take me, that's take me a month or a month and a half to read it. And then I only have 2 books for my reading list. But I think eventually I'm just going to have to send out a list with 2 books on it because
I think there's value in that.
A little deeper. Yeah, I think so. I think
there's
it's not
value in
value.
Yeah,
I agree.
I'm curious about your reading practice. I feel like reading is one of those things that you really have to force yourself to make time and space for this. And I view the way that you read as this sort of honed and cultivated practice.
Yeah, I used to think about it like that way too. Like I used to think I have to have quiet. I have to be able to sit down. I have to be able to focus. And what I've realized, because I have two little girls, a 6 and 3-year-old right now, and it used to require full silence. I need to focus. And just through necessity, I've gotten to the point where I can read when there's, when they're like yelling and screaming and playing. Like I'll be sitting on the sofa and they're building something, with Legos or whatever, make all this noise. And I've trained myself to be able to concentrate and still get through it. And, I would imagine I'm not soaking in every single fact and remembering as much as I would be if I were,
in
completely
silence,
focused
secluded.
in a quiet room. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just, I think there's a lot of benefit to that. It's better, obviously it's better than messing around on a phone. I think it's important for my girls to see me reading a paper book. I think that sets a good example for them. And I'm not like completely zoned out, but I would say if there is a practice, I try to read a little bit every night, when I'm going to bed. That probably actually happens like 4 days a week. And then on the weekends, I really focus in and we'll get through it. And my other kind of trick that I heard this on a podcast one time years ago. The guy said, if he finds a book that he doesn't like, if he's reading it and he kind of gets stuck or bored, he quits reading it and moves on to the next one. And I was always one of these types that was like, I'm going to finish it. I'm going to finish this book. And when I heard that, it kind of gave me permission to just eject the book. And I've been doing that. And that way, when I'm reading something, and it's not like it's like I'm reading John Grisham books where you can just, or like the Da Vinci Code, where you're just like cranking through. I'm trying to read challenging stuff. But
you read some really challenging, both history and accounts of the American West. Some deep books about habits.
Yeah. And like all this weird stuff about consciousness and stuff. But I'm either interested in it or I'm not. And I've kind of got a weird compulsive personality, I think. And so like when I get locked in on something, I'm really locked in. But then if I'm bored, I'm very bored. And so if I get bored, I just throw the book away. But I found like one time I was reading this book by this guy named Mark Twight, who's a really hardcore mountaineer. And I was reading it and I was like, I don't get it. It's a book about really hardcore mountain climbing stuff. And I just didn't get it. And the book has been praised by all these mountain climbers and it didn't connect. And then I went on a climbing trip in Alaska and got really, really, really cold for about 3 weeks. And then I came back later and picked that book up and I was obsessed with it. Like I got it. And so I think these books, there's a certain time when books, you can connect with books, and other times it's not that time in your life where it will connect. And I found that if I can walk away from books and then revisit them years later, sometimes I love them. So it's no need to force it, I don't think.
I like that. I like that a lot. I have the same practice and I keep books around oftentimes because it surprises me what will come back into my life often at the exact right time. And I'll find myself suddenly, I'm connecting with this book in a whole new way. And I think that's part of just personal evolution and the way that we change on a constant basis.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of a good way to see that we're always changing. I just think about myself 15 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever. And I was a completely different person with different opinions and not necessarily, given my experiences, that's who I was. But it's interesting to think about like the stuff that interests me now compared to then. And so I think some people like take pride in, having the way they go about things and kind of being like having these firm opinions. And I'm always like, man, I want people to change my opinions. I want to be evolving. Like I'm a different person than I was 20 years ago. And hopefully when I'm 63, I'll be different than I am now. And I want to change,
Yeah. I want to change and I want to be challenged. I'm curious to hear a little bit more because you started life on the East Coast. I think you and my husband are actually from about the same place in North Carolina. And then you made your way out west. I want to hear a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in a little town called Tarboro, North Carolina, about 10,000 people in Eastern North Carolina, and great town, great community, and went to college and was just kind of, it was very traditional for Eastern North Carolina and the, my friends and kind of my socioeconomic class. It was just like you go to school and then go to a college in North Carolina. And then most people just ended up working in some sort of finance or real estate or something. And I just didn't really put much thought into any of it. And I was kind of following that path. But I always loved the outdoors. I love camping, love adventure. My dad took me on a trip rafting the Grand Canyon when I was in maybe 10th grade. And I got sent out as part of a leadership retreat to Colorado when I was a senior in high school. And so I had this love of the West, and this, I would read Outside Magazine and just get real wound up. Like my dad one time told me that I shouldn't subscribe to it anymore because every time I'd read it, I'd get so kind of agitated afterwards because I wanted to be out West. But I'd say kind of half joking, I took myself too seriously at age 22 just to go be a ski bum, which is what I should have done. And so I was doing, I worked at Merrill Lynch and UBS, all this, wearing a suit every day. I was doing commercial real estate. I guess I was 26 or 27. And I was so frustrated with it just because I was thinking, man, I really want to be out West, but I don't know what I should do because I'm supposed to have these fancy jobs. And it's not at all like my parents were pushing me in any direction. They're unbelievably supportive of whatever I want to do. But I was just kind of pushing myself. And finally I was like, man, I'm done with this. I'm going to move out there no matter what. And whether it means working in a coffee shop or more traditional job. And I found out about this job called a ranch broker. I was like, what? Because I was doing commercial real estate at the time. I was thinking, there's a job selling ranches. And so I just started kind of hassling a bunch of these companies all over the West with my resume. And finally one hired me in Jackson Hole. And so I packed up a U-Haul, and my dad and I drove across the country. I moved to Jackson Hole, and that was 2005. And I was in the real estate business. It was very interesting, looking back, it's what got me out West, and it's what made me understand real estate. And it was a great opportunity, but, it was during the real estate boom of, pre-Great Recession. And looking back, now I work in conservation full time. And so a lot of what I was doing there was kind of the exact opposite of what I'm doing now, but it gave me the experience and the understanding of that business so that I'm a much more effective conservationist because I was kind of on the dark side for a while.
Yeah, I was going to say, looking at it through the lens of maybe development, it gives you a much different space at which to come at conservation. And I know that now you work for Palmer Land Trust.
Yeah. Well, so I moved out West, and it was crazy. It was the amount of the real estate market was just crazy. And anybody who was, paid any attention to the news during that time, you remember how nuts it was. And a lot of what I did was work with developers to help them buy these ranches, and they would develop them in one way or another. And at the time, I didn't really understand what that meant. All I understood was that I was making a lot of money. And I was seeing these guys, and most of them were not very impressive people. And I was like, man, if for every, dollar I make, those guys are making 100. I want to do that. I was like, I'm going to get my MBA and I'm going to be a real estate developer. And so I started applying to business schools. I got a full scholarship to go to business school. Went through my first year, they offered this big fancy publicly traded real estate development company, had one internship per year, and I got it. I beat out these guys from Harvard Business School.
Wow.
And I got the job,
this.
and I was like, yeah. And I was like, I was laser focused, and I was like, I'm going to be a real estate developer. And so I go to Washington, DC and downtown wearing a suit. And then I just gotten back from a climbing trip in Alaska. And I was really tired and I don't know, just kind of messed up. And then all of a sudden it was about 3 weeks after I got home, and I was in DC with my then girlfriend, now wife. And I was sitting around and I felt a lump where there shouldn't be a lump, and went to the doctor, and they were like, you have testicular cancer. And so there I was, kind of halfway screwed up physically and mentally from being at 20,000 feet for 3 weeks, and then being told I had cancer. And, they told me, and then 15 hours later, I was on the operating table, and they took care of it. They're scanning me and everything. All right, we're going to do our test. We'll get you set up with the oncologist for next week. And then a week later, the guy called me and he goes, you're not going to believe this, but what you had was so rare. I've never come across this, what you had. I had to call some of my colleagues, and it's benign. And so you're fine. He said, come in 3 weeks and get your staples out and you're good to go. And so it was like, I got all the benefit of having the shit scared out of me without actually having to go through the chemo or radiation or whatever they would have done to me. And also I was able to have kids, no problem. But that kind of that really shook me up. And I was 30 when that happened. And that started my change of re-examining kind of what I wanted to do and what I needed to do and what I should be doing. And then the economy collapsed, within a few months of that. And so all these so-called real estate developers I've been dealing with went out of business. They left, half developed ranches. They screwed the whole place up. And I, helped facilitate a lot of that. And so it was kind of like a midlife crisis at age 30 with health stuff. And I just, my then girlfriend and now wife, she had come into my life a few years before maybe a year and a half before, and she was kind of influencing my thinking in a different way. And so it was just kind of like everything started, the foundation shifted. And that kind of is what started. It wasn't overnight at all, but it'd be a better story if it was. But that's what started my focus on conservation, or not even conservation as much as doing purpose-driven work. There's more to it. For me, I need more than just trying to make a lot of money, if that makes sense.
No, and I feel like you went right into connection. And I think it takes time for these shifts to sort of occur. There's that moment that sort of changes your trajectory, but it often takes months, years, whatever it is, for that trajectory to really begin to change. But I feel like what you did is you moved towards connection in a different way. And I've never heard that side of the story, because I know that now you moved towards connecting to land, to conserving. But also, and I was curious if we could tie this together. I actually wrote down before I started this podcast a definition that I had found of conservation. I'm always kind of curious to look up the meaning of something. I think sometimes we use words over and over again, but we don't actually connect with their meaning. And I found this, which I liked, which was the preservation, protection, or restoration of the natural environment.
Yeah, I think that was a question I used to always ask everybody. I still do sometimes on my podcast, because conservation can mean so many things to so many different people. It can mean the rainforest. It can mean saving the whales. It can mean anything. And I like that one. And there's another one I saw somewhere. It was by Aldo Leopold. And it said, I think it's something like conservation is a state of harmony between men and land. And I think that's a good way to look at it too, because the thing is, the way I think about land conservation is it's got to be realistic, and it's got to make sense for the masses, or else it ain't going to scale. I mean, you can do these kind of one-off little projects here and there, but if you want to do landscape scale conservation, it's got to be realistic. And, the reality is people are on Earth and people are here, and there's private property rights and there are fences. And so, working within that system, men, how do you find a balance with nature? And that's a lot of what I do all day, particularly with water rights and irrigated farmland, is trying to figure out like where these irrigated farms are. It should be open shortgrass prairie with bison and
absolutely
and camels. Camels are out there, and saber-toothed tigers or whatever.
Things that are attuned to a high desert environment.
Yeah, but now it's plowed, and there's water being diverted out of the ditches, and so that is how it is now. And so, how do we find a state of balance between nature and people? And so, I don't know. There's no right answer, but I think it's definitely it's such a hard challenge, and I don't know that it'll ever really be solved. But it's like climate change. Like, what are you going to do? Just sit around and say, "Well, there's nothing we can do," and just wait for everything to collapse, or you can try. And so, I consider myself, we're just trying to find solutions. And we are. We are in my little small corner of the West. So it's really inspiring stuff. And I'm just glad that I was able to make that change out of what I was doing and find something that, I'm excited to do in the morning, and I feel proud to do, because I never really felt proud of what I was, when I was just help brokering ranches. Like, it's cool, but I was never like really proud of it, but I am proud of what I do now.
Yeah. I think in everything you do, there's this sort of theme woven through of purpose. I mean, just listening to your podcast, I can really hear the amount of purpose that you put into every aspect of your life. And I think that conservation is no different. I'm curious to ask you about finding that balance between men and land. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is how we are part of land. And just sort of when you look at from an evolutionary biology standpoint, the way that we've co-evolved with land and the way that we interact, and that there's this concept that I think came about maybe at the dawn of agriculture 10, 12,000 years ago, that we're separate. We begin to kind of separate ourselves from land. We begin to superimpose ourselves on it. And I think that this is, like you said, there are some facts here in the way that things are playing out. There's private land ownership, and that's a fact. And there's going to have to be a balance between rural areas and urban areas. And there's just no getting around that. There's going to have to be a balance of water in those two places. But I think that we have to look at both pieces separately, men and land, but we also have to look at where the two have come together and are integral to one another, and the way that our interaction as a part of nature changes us as much as we change the landscapes that we occupy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's one of the things I love about working at Palmer is they really do focus on that intersection of people and land. Whereas a group like the Nature Conservancy, which I love, I got great friends at Nature Conservancy. I've had the head of Colorado Nature Conservancy on my podcast. They're a great partner. We share funding and do joint projects together. But a lot, they are focused almost exclusively on the ecology. And they have just some of the smartest scientists you've ever found some of the smartest scientists and ecologists anywhere working on their projects. And that's why they focus on areas like in Southeast Colorado and out in Kansas, where there are these opportunities of wide open spaces of private land where they can do their work and link together, wildlife habitat and things like that. And that's important. But what I like about what I'm doing is we're obviously focused on land at Palmer, and we're basically just doing kind of fancy real estate transactions and to facilitate this land conservation, but we're focused on where people and the land intersect. So kind of community. And a lot of these communities that I deal with are farming communities. And these folks have been out there for several generations now, just completely committed to the land and to growing food. And a lot of the farmers I deal with are growing food. They're not growing, commodity crops. And they're able to, they're growing vegetables, melons, that kind of thing. And a family of several siblings is able to make a go of it on a few hundred acres because they're selling these high value crops. It's not like in, Iowa or somewhere where, thousands and tens of thousands of acres of corn. I mean, this is family
it's not
operations. Commodity. Yeah. So it's just really inspiring because I think those farmers that we work with, they're driven by purpose. They're not at all driven by some desire to get rich.
Farming's not a good business for getting rich.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like they love it so much. I mean, in some ways, I can't believe the amount of heartache that they're able to take because they love what they're doing so much, because it is a tough business. I mean, you think about all the variables that are out of your control in that business, and they're doing it year after year and they love it. Yeah. It's just, I don't know, very inspiring. And I've learned a lot from those people. And I'm an outsider, with this North Carolina accent, it's very clear that I'm not from there, but I'm very interested in what they do and appreciative of what they do and curious about what they do. And I'm just glad that they've kind of welcomed me in, and hopefully our conservation work can help them. That it's worthless if it doesn't help them. And so if we can pay them a bunch of money for a conservation easement and they can buy, pay down debt, buy more land,
continue farming, which is important. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people are at risk of losing that right now.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's what when I was in the real estate business, a lot of what I did, it was a zero-sum game. Like I wanted to beat the person on the other side of the table. And I wanted my client to win. I wanted them to lose. And I didn't believe that there was such a thing as a win-win solution. But a lot of this land conservation work that we're doing, it is win-win. And if somebody had told me that years ago, I'd be like, that's not true. That's feel-good talk. But it's true. What we're doing with water, it allows the municipalities to win. It allows the farmers to win. It allows conservation to win. And then the ripple effects for the economy go out. And we've quantified it. I mean, we've done economic impact studies that show the numbers. And so the only people who don't win, are the people who want to put up, spec houses in a farm field. But otherwise, the whole community wins. So and I say that as a guy who didn't think that was possible.
That's a really beautiful thing. I just sat down with our mutual friend, Heather Hansman, and had a long chat about water. And so that's nice to hear sort of a real life application of how that is working and is a win-win scenario for people out west. Because I think increasingly the conversation around water is the conversation we're all going to be having over the next 10 years.
Yes. Well, I was in Denver last night. I live in Colorado Springs, and I was up in Denver, and it's just amazing the development that's happened up there. And it's the same in Colorado Springs, but I was like downtown, and I see everything through the lens of water now. And there simply is not enough water. And you hear these projections of how many people are going to be moving to Colorado before 2050. And, here in Colorado Springs, I've got this water bottle here filled up, and 80% of this water in this bottle came from the Colorado River, which is on the other side of the Continental Divide, and it's been pumped in. And there's no river in Colorado Springs. And,
no, along the Front Range.
No.
But there's continuous development really from Pueblo to Fort Collins. I mean, when I was a kid, it was pretty separate, but now it's just one continuous line of little houses and lots of people.
Well, there's just simply not going to, there's at this rate, if nothing changes, there's not going to be enough water. And so the development will shut down at some point. And they're going to, at some point here in Colorado Springs, they're going to turn that nozzle off, or at least turn it down, that's pumping all that water from Colorado River Basin. And it's going to be quite a surprise for everybody. But I mean, there are solutions. I think in the end, it's all about water efficiency in agriculture. I mean, that's what's going to need to happen. But
tell me more about that. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is there's just not enough water. And when the whole water rights system was put in place, when they established the water right legal system, and I'm not a water lawyer, but it was during one of the wettest periods in recorded history.
And hasn't been revisited in 100 years. We're coming up on its 100-year anniversary.
Yeah, so it's very complicated stuff, but they basically divvied up all the water. So any drop of water, even a mud puddle in the state of Colorado, is owned by somebody in theory. And so when they came up with this system, it was during the wettest time ever. And so there's never been that much water since. And so there are all these water rights that are out there that there's no real water associated with them, or there hasn't been in 100 years or whatever. And so there's just simply not enough. And when you see all these people coming in and moving in, so basically you have to take water. In order for a city to expand, they basically go to farmers or ranchers, they buy water rights, and then they convert those water rights from agricultural use into municipal use, and they move them to a city. And then that allows to build a new housing development or new building or whatever. And so in order for agriculture to remain a viable part of the economy and for the cities to continue to grow, we're just going to have to figure out a way to be more efficient with water. And right now, the main way people irrigate is through flood irrigation, where they just divert it out of a river, flood the field. But you're going to have to, whether it's sprinklers or whether it's drip irrigation or something that's yet to be invented, we got to figure out a way to stretch that water a little bit farther than it's going right now. And there are a lot of super smart people that I know and work with who are doing that. Colorado State's doing a lot of work with that. But I worry it's almost like climate change, or even with this coronavirus thing. Like with coronavirus, it was an acute problem, and everybody's, that needed to be solved immediately, an emergency. And we couldn't quite figure out how to go about it. And we're still kind of a mess. No matter what side of the thing you're on, everybody agrees it's a mess.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And so, when they turn off the water or turn down the water from the Colorado River Basin, and Colorado Springs is all of a sudden in a real issue, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I think it puts us in a position to have to solve something quickly, which isn't the way that we've been doing things, just like you said. And I think one of the things I'm curious about from an agricultural perspective is how do we implement more dry farming and more when you look at green water, which is just the water that falls from the sky. And when you're looking at grass-fed beef, I think about 97 to 98% of the water inputs for grass-fed beef is just green water that would have fallen from the sky anyway. And very little of it is actually blue water from irrigation ditches. And so I think the more that we can focus on some of these techniques that really harness what water there is and improve soil conditions that are able to absorb that water and then put it back into the water table, and find plants like perennial grasses that have been on the plains forever that know how to utilize what little water we get out west. I just think that and any innovation around that is all going to flow downhill in a positive way.
No, I agree. And what I was saying earlier, I hope it didn't come off as too negative. It's more just kind of trying to look the issue straight in the face. But I mean, I'm very optimistic about where we're going with all this, because I'm just in meetings all day with some of the smartest water people in the country who are devoting all this brain power they have to trying to solve these problems. And they're making great progress. I mean, it's not thought exercises, at least the people I'm dealing with. It's not just this academic nonsense of dreaming up ideas and then not implementing them. I mean, it's really smart people.
Because we need implementation.
Yeah, that's the thing. You got to have execution. And I think that's one of the benefits of my background, is that going into the nonprofit, world after basically almost 20 years of for-profit work. And is that I'm not interested in thought exercises. Like, I'm interested in getting stuff done. And there are a lot of other people out there like me. I mean, I think all these people I deal with, they could be fancy lawyers or doctors or investment bankers or whatever, and they're devoting their brain power to solving these problems and making great progress. And so that's one of the things I think about my podcast, or just where it could go in the future, is I feel like, I look at High Country News and it's so depressing these days. Every time I look, and I had the editor-in-chief on my podcast a while back. But when I look at it, it's just one depressing thing after another. And it starts making me mad after a while. And I'm like, there's so much good stuff going on here where people are solving these problems and finding solutions. And I thought, like, maybe Mountain Prairie should become like a media outlet that only focuses on positive news.
You have your newsletter. You have your weekly newsletter, Good News from the American West. And I think that that's a really great space to start. And I agree with you. I want to see more positivity reflected in media and more active problem solving that's happening from real people. I actually wonder a little bit if this is a good moment to talk about Teddy Roosevelt.
Anytime's a good time to talk about Teddy Roosevelt.
I thought that you might feel that way. I was thinking about that with you talking about just really being able to implement and to problem solve. And I know that you have next year, you started a now, I think it's sold out, Strenuous Life retreat. And I felt really inspired to look up, because I think that you really have taken a lot of ownership of the idea of a strenuous life. And so I sat down and I read that speech. I read the Strenuous Life speech, and I just thought you might want to talk about Teddy Roosevelt and a strenuous life.
Yeah, I love him, and I don't, his politics. He was a rich dude from the late 1800s, and so a lot of his, you have to give the disclaimer up front that a lot of his opinions and things like that, they don't translate into, modern day. But I know a lot of historians, I've gotten to be friends with a lot of historians, they talk about present topic, or a concept called presentism. It's unfair to try to apply the values and standards of today to historical figures. And so
I really agree with that.
Yeah, with that out of the way, politics aside, what I like about Teddy Roosevelt, what I really admire, is I call it his operating system. He, the way he went about living life. He was a rich kid. He grew up in one of the wealthiest families in New York City, a family that had a lot of problems, actually. Like, his uncle committed suicide. Teddy's brother committed suicide. His son eventually committed suicide. It was this family that was not at all, a very, very wealthy family.
But not a lot of stability.
Not a lot of stability. And Teddy's father died when he was, relatively young. And Teddy had asthma when he was young. He was a sick kid. And so he very well could have just sat on his ass and done nothing. And in fact, he had doctors telling him as a child and a teenager, like, you need to just do nothing. You need to sit around. You can be a man of letters, is what they said. And he said, well, actually, I'm going to do the exact opposite. And I'm going to go as hard as I can. And he kind of overcame this childhood sickness, and just through really force of will. I mean, he forced himself to go as hard as he could every day. And it's not, he did work himself probably a little too hard, but as he got married and grew up and had a family, when he was being a dad, he was focused on being a dad. And if you read some of the letters he wrote to his children, I've got a book called Theodore Roosevelt's Letters to His Children. And it's hilarious because he loves his kids, but he also loves politics and he loves physical exercise. And there's this term he uses in that speech called the strenuous life, which is just when you're doing something, do it hard. And there's another quote by him that says, I believe in going hard at everything. And I think that's the case. And when I think of it, I mean, like, when I'm working, I want to be working. When I'm running, I want to be running. When I'm with my girls, I want to be with my girls. When I'm asleep, I want to be asleep.
Yeah, and I think I love that. Good for you for adding that.
And I heard Edmund Morris. I saw an interview with his biographer, Edmund Morris, who he referred to Teddy as being a energetic sleeper. Because it's not like he wasn't burning it at both ends. He'd sleep 8 hours a night. But I've just found that idea has been very powerful for me. And it's amazing how much I can get done. And I'm not like, I don't really like the way Tim Ferriss goes about trying to, have all these accomplishments. And so I'm not trying to do that. But there are certain things that I want to do. And I've been amazed that with how much I can accomplish, that makes me, happy. by kind of focusing on this idea of the strenuous life, if that makes any sense.
I think that makes all the sense in the world. And I also think that it's antithetical in the best possible way to the sort of way that we have lost focus. We've got all these devices, all this noise. And what I hear you saying is that when you are present in the moment, focusing and working on what you're working on. And I think that you really embody that. And it's something that I really admire about you. We've talked a lot about this, but your ability to implement these practices and to just really be with what you're doing. And I think you achieve results, but you are oriented towards the journey, which I think is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. I think the process is everything. And I've learned that if I know that I put full effort into the process, if the result is not what I would like, I can feel a lot better about it. Whereas if I half-ass it and the result's not what I'd like, I really beat myself up. And so, yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I think, I've watched all these endless videos with Edmund Morris, who wrote the trilogy about TR's life. And, some people say that Teddy was manic, or, if he was just kind of crazy or whatever. But there's one interview where it's actually Conan O'Brien interviewing Edmund Morris. And it's not like a funny thing. It's like a real interview. But he's talking about how when there are all these reports of when people would come in the office to speak to TR, he would sit completely still and he was locked in on them and was listening to everything they said. It's not like he was fidgeting around or couldn't sit still. It was just, he's kind of the ultimate single tasker. And, I've read this book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. Yeah. And I think you've read Deep Work by Cal Newport.
Yeah, you recommended it to me and I read it.
Yeah. And I think all this stuff that I seem to kind of be attracted to, just an idea of focus and no distractions. And when you're doing something, do it with full force. And I don't mean like gritting my teeth, like trying to be macho kind of guy. I just mean like focused and single task. And it all kind of goes back to that idea of the strenuous life. And I try to do that when I'm reading, although, when my girls are running around, it's hard to focus completely on the reading, but it's kind of a good barometer if I'm doing things right. And I'm not always. I mean, there are plenty of days where I'm just completely messing around or watching YouTube or something. But those are bad days. Like I don't feel good when it's over, but I feel great when I've focused.
How do you cultivate focus? And I think first I pulled a quote from the Strenuous Life, I think for myself more than anything, that I liked. And just so people can get a good idea. I wish to preach not the doctrine of ignoble ease, but the doctrine of the strenuous life, the life of toil and effort, of labor and strife, to preach that highest form of success which comes not to the man who desires mere easy peace, but to the man who does not shrink from danger, and who out of these wins the splendid ultimate triumph. And I think that I love this because it's about work and it's about not getting too stuck in comfort. And I think that we share a love of pushing ourselves outside of our comfortable boundaries. And so I'm curious to ask you a little bit about that and also how you cultivate focus, because I think that's hard in today's world where everything is vying for our attention.
Yeah, it is. I've gone through a million different ways, like these little hacks of trying to prevent myself from getting distracted, whether it's putting blockers on the computer or doing little things on the phone. There's something like put the phone on black and white and it's not as attractive and all that. And I feel like that's it's like I'm trying to put limits on things or trying to prevent things from coming. But what I found at the end, there's this guy who does a podcast, Rich Roll. You've heard him.
I love Rich Roll.
He has some saying, and it's very simple. I don't know if he came up with it or what, but it said mood follows action. And I've found that at the end of the day, like, if I'm messing around or not feeling good, if I just start doing stuff, like it doesn't matter what, just start doing something, I feel so much better than just sitting around in my own head. And it all kind of came clear years ago. I was just kind of feeling down or sloppy, tired. And I decided to go in the backyard and my dog had been out there. And I was like, all right, I'm going to pick up all this dog shit in the backyard. And I started cleaning it up. I cleaned up all the dog shit in the yard and I felt so much better. And I was like, that is so interesting that cleaning up dog shit is more preferable than sitting around and thinking about stuff and doing nothing. And so, because you would think that'd be the worst thing in the world to do, but it was so much better. And so I was like, if I,
taking action.
Yeah, just taking
any action.
Just getting going, And I think of it as like everything in my life, at least, is momentum. And it's like, if there's like this big, like a big boulder or something that's on a slight incline, and it just takes a little bit of energy to get it going. You got to push real hard at first to get it going, and then you can kind of roll it. And even if it's a slight uphill, it'll go, 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 go. But it's all about momentum. And the longer I sit around and be a slob or whatever, the more energy it takes. I think I heard somebody call it activation energy to get it going. But once it's going,
that resonates.
I'm great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it goes in both directions. Like if I'm the slob, the momentum will go that way.
Yeah, that kinetic energy sort of builds.
Yeah. So I think, it'd be great to have some life hack or something, some button I could press on the phone that would make me focus. But in the end, it's
you and your brain.
I just got to start doing this. Yeah. I mean, there are ways having lists, preparing the night before of what I'm going to do the next day, that helps. Doing my meditation helps, exercising helps, all that kind of stuff. But in the end of the day, man, it's just the discipline of forcing myself to start. And there's no simple way for me. I wish there was, but there's not. And I guess it makes sense, because if there's a simple way, everybody do it. There wouldn't be a problem anymore. And so it's for anybody. And so it's just kind of grit my teeth and go.
Yeah. Ultimately, there's this sense of responsibility and discipline. I think actually there was a lot of medicine for me in what you just said. It caught me at a time when I really needed to hear it. Speaking of discipline, you just did a big run, and you're a big runner. You just did a really big run. Let's not understate this. You want to talk about that a little bit? Because I'm so interested. Talk about moving into discomfort. Your running practice is quite strenuous.
Yeah. Well, I got to start with a disclaimer. Like, I'm not good at it. If you look at results, like, it's the hard events, and the way I look at it is like, if I can do it, that's pretty cool. But
you're full of shit right now.
Like, if you look at the people that do it, like, I'm very bad at it. So I'm not at all like real proud of myself or anything by my performance. But yeah, I years ago, I never really had run. I never run anything, far. I think when I moved to Colorado, the farthest I'd ever run was 18 miles. And I read the book Born to Run, and I saw the author speak, and I was just kind of intrigued by it. And the way the guy wrote the book, he made it out, he's talking about how running is one of the few things that we humans are actually good at from a physical perspective. And we're kind of built to run. And it just made me interested. So I signed up for a 50-mile run. I'd never even run a marathon. I was like, I'm going to do Leadville 50.
50 miles.
And I signed up, and I just started. And Leadville 50, I mean, it's pretty easy as far as 50s go. It's got like 7,000 feet of vertical or something, but it's up high. And I literally had never run more than 18 miles. And so I just started training, and all of a sudden, after a few months, you just can kind of go and you can keep going. And so that just started me. I try to do an event, some sort of ultra marathon every year, or some sort of hard event every year. And so I just, this last week, or like 3 weeks ago, I did one called the Sangre de Cristo 100 in the Wet Mountain Valley of Colorado, which is West Cliff is the closest town. And it was 104 miles, 20,000 feet of vertical. And, the guy, whoever won it, I think he did it in like 24 hours or something.
Oh,
it took me 35. Yeah, it took me 35
With
hours.
no sleep, or did you pause in this?
No sleep. Yeah, you just go. And so, you cruise along. I kind of jog the flat parts and downhills where it's pretty rocky trail. Actually, it's all on trails. So like where I can run, I do. Otherwise, it's kind of power hiking, and you just put it on cruise control and go. And, in the end, like the physical fitness part, I feel like, that's most people can get fit. People can get fit enough to do it, but it's this weird combination of physical fitness, and then nutrition is, I'd say, more important than anything. And then just the mindset of like,
I was going to say mindset. Yeah. And you've said you're not a quitter, and that's clear.
Yeah. And so it's, once you figure out the nutrition, and I remember when I was training for my first one,
tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I used to do all this, all these fancy, the gels and all that kind of stuff. And over time, I've realized like that stuff is kind of garbage for me. And so it's really, you just got to figure out a way to keep the calories coming in without getting sick. And so everybody's different. There's no formula for anybody, but over time, that's really what a lot of the training is. It's just figuring out what works for you, what works for your stomach. And so, for me, it's a lot of high fat foods, because I think of those gels as like jet fuel. And then I think of like macadamia nuts or almond butter or whatever as like coal, like slow burning.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
For a long time. Yeah. And so I cruise along, man. Some people like people I've worked with and stuff like, well, what was your training plan? And what did you, and I really don't have training plans. Like every weekend, I mean, the deal is for me, every weekend I'd get up at 4 a.m. and I'd go run 25 to 30 miles with like 7,000 to 8,000 feet of vertical. And then during the week, just run whenever I had time. And that was enough, And again, I'm not trying to win. Like I'm racing the cutoffs. They have these cutoffs where like every, 20 miles or whatever, if you're going too slow, they make you stop. And so my goal was like be about an hour ahead of each one of those cutoffs and just cruise. Like I'm not trying to win. I'm in it for myself. But this particular race, it took me like 35 hours nonstop. I would stop at aid stations to change my socks and mess with my feet and eat food and stuff. But otherwise you're moving along the whole time. But I had some crazy hallucinations, which I've never had before. I've had the beginnings of them in another 100-miler I did, but something about this when I was by myself basically the entire time, except the last 10 miles. I've had pacers in the past. And so it was a very small race. I think 25 people started the 100-miler and only 15 finished. And so like all night, in Sangres, I was completely by myself. And so you got your headlamp on, and it's almost like you're just in a tunnel. And my brain started doing really strange things. Which has never happened. Seeing stuff that's right there. I mean, it's stuff that I was sure it was there. People, animals, pieces of machinery, that kind of stuff. And then my friend joined me for the last 10 miles, which was during the day. And I was really seeing stuff at that point. And I was pointing it out to him and he'd like, no, nothing's there.
That's unbelievable. What does that journey look like with your mind? I mean, here's this really impressive physical journey, but I think what's even more impressive is the mental journey, both the discipline and, I mean, it sounds like you had to go inside of yourself to get through this.
Yeah, it was interesting though, because like physically it was, I mean, this sounds crazy, I know, but like physically it was a pleasant experience. Like it was not, my knees felt completely fine. My legs were hardly sore afterwards. I'm not joking. And I'm not good at like, I don't know. I had blisters on this one, which I've never had to deal with blisters before, but otherwise like physically it was not that big a deal. But the mental part was it was interesting. There was never a point where I thought I was going to quit and never a point where I was scared. And I'd see these people, but it was never a scary type thing. It was more just kind of like, well, that's kind of interesting. But there were these points where I felt like I was falling asleep while I was running. Like I started having dreams as I was running. And so it wasn't at all, there was never a point where I was like having, grit my teeth. I'm not going to quit, that kind of thing. It was like just slow and steady. I'm cruising. But it was just very interesting. I told my wife afterwards that the running was the least interesting thing of that whole event. And one of the kind of insights I had like the next day or 2 days later, and I wrote about it on my Patreon to the people that support the podcast on Patreon, was that the next 2 or 3 days later, I was still kind of out of it from the sleep deprivation, but I was driving my daughter to school and I saw what looked like a homeless guy on the side of the road yelling or talking to something that wasn't there. And I was looking at it and I was like, that 72 hours ago, that was me. I mean, I wasn't talking to him, but 4 or 5 more hours that I bet I would have been talking to him. And I was seeing people that were not there. And like that night when I was going to bed after the race, I was at the Airbnb and I could see through the blinds. There's a little crack in the blinds. And I saw these 3 kids outside. They were sitting on a fence and they were pointing at me and laughing. And one of them was taking selfies. And I watched them like 15 minutes. I was just looking at them and I was like, why do they keep looking at me? And I called my wife and I was like, hey, Kim, are there kids out there on that fence? And she opened the blinds. There's nobody there. And so, that showed like with 35 hours of physical effort, I got to the same point as, some of these folks who've had trauma or they've been to war and had head injuries or whatever has happened that has allowed them to their brain. And so we're all pretty damn close, just a few clicks of the dial and we could be that person on the street and, who's seeing stuff. And so it gave me a level of compassion for that I hope I can maintain, because I think that's a much more valuable lesson than some silly nonsense of running around for 35 hours. I mean, in the end, that's a pointless exercise. But if you can get some insights like that can apply to your life and hopefully make the world a little bit better, I'm all for being more compassionate. I need to. And so hopefully it'll stick with me.
I think that's really important right now. I've been digging a lot into compassion myself and just playing with this idea of we're all connected and I can see myself in every other person. And if that's the case, if you can recognize that you're the homeless person on the side of the street and to see yourself in that space, the amount of empathy and compassion I think we can hold for one another becomes really important. And I think during a time that's divisive, I don't think there's any more powerful insight than compassion.
I agree. There's a book by Sam Harris called Free Will, which he makes an argument that there's no such thing as free will, that we don't have free will. And I don't like that argument because obviously the way that I operate and all this nonsense I've been talking about is that I'm trying to control myself and I'm trying to make the most out of days and push myself and all this. But he makes a very convincing argument that's really, really hard for me to poke holes in, about that at the end of the day, we don't have free will. We're just a product of our DNA and our past experiences. And so when you think about things that way, I still don't want to believe it, but it does make me more compassionate because you see, a homeless person or a drug addict or even like a criminal, somebody that's just but nobody would choose that, if you think about, if you could go and see how this person was born and the series of events that led them to where they are,
you would be in the same place
they're making. Yeah. And so it's kind of a helpless feeling, but at the same time, it makes you have more compassion for people. The book's only like 50 pages or 60 pages. It's very interesting to read, whether you agree with it or not. It's just a neat way to try to think about things.
Interesting thought exercise. I'm curious I know you have a pretty strong meditation practice. And I know at times we've talked about breath work. Does that figure into compassion, to discipline, to holding space for yourself on that run, whatever it is?
Yeah, I think the meditation stuff definitely helps with that. I've been I used to live in Boulder, and I think in 2012, I did a day-long retreat at the Shambhala Center there, which is a Buddhist deal. And I'll tell you, it's probably the least weird religious experience I've ever had. Like, it wasn't at all like indoctrination into Buddhist principles. It was just like, this is how you meditate. And I started doing it and just kind of, off and on. It's not like I started doing it every single day, but I did kind of commit to it. And I've found it to be the most important thing I've ever done. Now that I have a family, wife and family. I mean, I kind of say half joking that it's more important for them because like they're the ones that have to deal with me. But it's just really shown me how kind of out of control everybody's mind is and how you need to just kind of separate from that and have some space between what your mind is doing kind of instinctively or possibly out of our own control, with the free will thing, and just to kind of separate from it. And I've done lots of different types of practices, started with just focusing on your breath, kind of the standard. But for the last few years, I've been doing Sam Harris's meditation app. And I used to be very anti-meditation app because I thought, the phone is half of the problem here. Like, I don't want to be near that phone when I'm meditating, but Sam Harris is less about like stress relief or trying to calm down or anything. And it's more about understanding consciousness and understanding how our minds work. And it's not all the time pleasant. A lot of time it's very, very frustrating for me, but it's like exercise, like exercise is good for me. And every now and then I'm going to get injured. And a lot of times it's not comfortable, but in the end, it's very important for me. And that's how this meditation app is. And there's no expectation when I'm doing it that it's going to put me in a good mood or calm me down, but it has given me just a much deeper understanding of how my brain works, which allows me to be more patient with myself and more patient with other people. And, I think everybody needs to find their own path for what meditation practice works for them. But I've found that Sam Harris app to be one of the more valuable things I've done. With exercise, I used to try to calm myself down with exercise, but there's some book I was reading. Yeah,
I resonate with that. Kind of like get the anxiety out, get the nervous energy out of my body.
Well, they were talking about in some book, it was by one of the guys who used to be head of the Shambhala Center, but he was saying it's like when you're trying to train a horse or something, like you can wear a horse out and it will behave. Like if you run a horse down, it'll behave, but that's different than training the horse. And so like actually training the horse to get along with you. And so I think I used to just wear myself out with exercise, and I still do. But I think the meditation is just more, I'm training my mind. I don't need to wear myself out as much. Like my mind is more in control with meditation. And so it's obviously it's not fixed. It's not like my brain is like, I got it completely under control and I still miss, I'll fall off the wagon with meditation and I don't do it for a while, but my wife can tell when I haven't been doing it. So that helps.
I think the goal isn't to fix. At least I've tried to move away from that goal with myself. And I think there is that initial, like, I want to fix all these things. And it's become instead that I want to cultivate awareness around, just like you said, around my consciousness, around the way that my mind works, and to really exercise my mind. Instead of a mind at rest, it's a muscle well worked, because you've given me a lot of medicine this podcast. I often fall into the trap of exercising out my nervous energy instead of trying to really harness the power of my mind.
Yeah. And I think exercise is good. If I'm in a bad mood, and I know if I go for a run, I'll feel better. And so I think of meditation as almost like steering like a big cargo ship or an aircraft carrier. And it's not going to do anything. You're not going to make any hard turns in meditation, but if you do it every single day, you can kind of stay on you stay on the path where you're going. It's a very long-term thing. It builds on itself over day after day after day after day. Whereas exercise is like an acute fix. If there's an acute problem, I need to fix it now. Yeah, if I do 100 burpees, like my mood's going to change.
And I think there's, in some ways, I think there's a biological precedence for this, that exercise is a quick way to receive endorphins, to receive dopamine, and to get those fixed. But meditation is really working to break and make connections in your brain that are going to change the way that maybe those neurotransmitters work over a much longer space of time. And it's going to take a lot more to turn around these habits and these ruts that your brain sort of falls into, and that you so easily just go into this response. And to work to change that response takes time.
Yeah, it takes time. It's just like getting in shape takes time. Getting in running shape takes time. And I could go out for a run and really wear myself out, but like to actually be in running shape, that's going to take months. And the older I get, the more months it takes. But and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about this commitment to kind of plodding along and not quitting and being consistent. And I think whether it's making a podcast or whether it's exercising or whether it's meditation, like you can't beat a commitment to consistency over a long period of time. And I think that like my friend Brendan Leonard, who does Semi-Rad, he's been such a great resource for me as far as creative projects. And I've had him on my podcast a few times, and I think he's a perfect example of that. He's just put out posts on, he's written blog posts every Thursday for 10 years. And people were like, how'd you get to be such a great outdoor writer? And you got a column in Outside Magazine and all this. And he's like, because I've been grinding my ass off for 10 years, every single week. And that's like with my good news email. Every Wednesday, I'm sending that thing out. And so I think there's a lot to that, just whether it's exercise, controlling your mind, whatever, just this commitment, a commitment to consistency, that's taken me a long time to figure that out.
I think that's a hard thing to put into practice too. I respect that, because consistency is hard, but I know that the best times in life that I've found consistency, I do this a lot with diet. I eat the same thing for breakfast every single day. And that level of consistency actually allows me more freedom than it does constriction. It really allows me to just have these habits and have this repetitive motion that keeps me going. I think it's going back to that idea of movement and just the sort of kinetic energy around it.
No, I agree. I think having constraints are huge. I mean, I think I always had this idea like, oh, if I didn't have this commitment, I could do all this other fun stuff. Like when I'm training for a long race, like training for that 100 miler this summer, every single Saturday I'm out, it started 4 a.m. running. And I remember thinking, well, if I didn't have this race, I could be doing more fun stuff. I could go fishing or whatever. But I wouldn't go fit. I think having these constraints, like this is what I do every Saturday, it really helps me. It really helps me just accomplish more, be more fulfilled. And again, I'm not trying to be like Tim, like this accomplishment. I don't think that's the right word, but just do more stuff that makes me happier, I guess.
Yeah. to cultivate joy. I think a lot about this to find, I'm not sure if I always struggle with this word happy. Is it joy? Is it happiness? Is it contentment, fulfillment? But there is something that I'm searching for within that. And I do find that consistency is part of that equation for me as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're wired similarly with that stuff.
Yeah. I want to know how nature has played a part in this, because you're out there running in the mountains all the time and fishing, and you have a unique relationship to nature, having seen it both through the lens of conservation, through development, but also just a personal relationship.
Yeah, there's a book called The Nature Fix by Florence Williams, and I want to get her on the podcast at some point. But
this has been on
it.
my list.
Yeah, Brendan Leonard, actually, the guy that I was just mentioning earlier, he recommended it to me, and I read it, and it's really a neat book because it lays out. It's basically like a scientific explanation of why nature is so good for us, and it's the kind of thing where I knew all of it, but I didn't have any proof. Like, when I go out in the woods, I feel better. And she explains why that is from a evolutionary scientific perspective. And so it was one of these books that none of it was a surprise, but I was just glad to have the proof. And so, I mean, I don't know. I've just always been drawn to being outdoors ever since I was a kid. I think one of the things I've found that I really like is that I've gained a lot from is kind of the humility that it brings. I mean, I've done some big, mountain climbing trips up in Alaska and in South America and things like that. And where I've really just gotten the shit kicked out of me, like I've been in there, people, dying up there and stuff. And so I think it really shows how inconsequential we are, we humans in the grand scheme of things. And I think that's important. I think that's important to have some humility. And I think a lot of people don't have that. And then I think for me personally, I think it's being out, whether it's running or on these mountaineering trips or whatever, is this getting tougher. And I don't mean that like, I'm not trying to be like a testosteroned out, like, quote, tough guy, but I think it's just made me tougher and made me be able to deal with regular life better, knowing that I can go out and I can wander around the woods for 35 hours without stopping, or I can go, be in literally minus 70 degrees on the side of a mountain and be all right. It just makes, in some ways, it makes regular life a little more frustrating because like I'll get frustrated about having to, some of my cell phone or something. And I'm like, but I can run for 35 hours in the woods. and so I think the toughness side of things are just kind of a calibration of what is difficult and what's not. I think that's important. And then, I mean, at the end of the day, it just makes me feel better, being outside, even just running around the neighborhood versus running on a treadmill. I mean, I can't remember the last time I ran on a treadmill. I mean, probably 15 years. Last year I did this thing where I committed to running 3 miles every single day. Every day, no matter what, sick, tired, cold, snowy. I did it for like 300 days. And then I signed up for my 100 and I had to start resting but it beat me up pretty good. But like every day going outside and being, even in snowstorms, whatever, it was so great from a mental standpoint. And I think it's just being outside. And that book, Florence Williams' book, explains it better than I can. But it's what we're supposed to be doing. We're not supposed to be sitting in front of these computers all day,
No, and I think that when we think about 200,000 years of anatomically modern humans and their evolution through time, it's only been the last 10,000 years, but really 500 that we've been so separated from nature. And I think we lose how many of our biological processes and systems are governed by nature, that our circadian rhythm is modulated by the sun, that some of our parasympathetic nervous system is activated when we hear bird song, that it's activated when we see a vista and we go into panoramic vision instead of this hyperfoveated focused vision. It actually changes your nervous system, and grounding. There's a lot of scientific evidence. And I think there's also there's just the evidence of experience, right? We are a part of nature. That's how we evolved. And I think too, in that is a sense of discomfort. Nature it's not comfortable. It's not a couch with 4 walls that's temperature controlled. And I think that those biological processes that happen when we're really cold, when we're really tired, when our bodies are overworked, there's a place for them. And I think there's a place to go into discomfort, which is something I think you clearly have done to a sort of therapeutic effect.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think everything you said is 100% true. And like, I think that plays into taking cold showers, and it plays into fasting. And like, we're built, the idea of eating 3 meals a day, if that had been the case, if humans could not function when we're hungry, we wouldn't have made it we would never have made it to where we are now. And
no Paleolithic refrigerator.
Yeah. And so we're supposed to be like, we're built to be hungry. We're built to have wild variations in temperature. And we've got we're eating all day long, and we're sitting, we're within maybe a 5-degree variation in our temperatures throughout the day. And so it's kind of forced me to have to do all this weird, and you do the same thing, all this weird stuff to try to get.
I take cold showers. I also do intermittent fasting.
Yeah, same. And it's amazing when you start doing that. It's hard at first, but like I try to every other week, I try to not eat for 36 hours. So like I will eat dinner, and then I just don't eat dinner on Sunday night, don't eat anything on Monday, and then eat breakfast on Tuesday. And it's not hard. Like it's hard the first time you do it, but after a while you feel completely fine. You actually feel better. And I've got this whoop strap that I've been using for the last year.
I have my Oura Ring.
Yeah. Super high end heart rate monitor, and everything, all the stats are like off the charts after not eating for 36 hours. And then like the cold showers, the idea of taking a cold shower a few years ago would be my worst nightmare. And now I can't function without it. I mean,
I look forward to it.
Yeah. And then the running, like if somebody had I remember the first time I heard about somebody saying they ran 100 miles, and I thought they were lying, first of all. And then I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. I was like, nobody can do that. And I'm not a good athlete, and I can go out and run 100 miles. Like it's, I don't know. It just makes me wonder how much potential we've lost as a species because of the comfort.
Yeah. I think there's something,
and again, like
almost
you and
insidious.
we're not tough guys. We're not trying to be like tough guys or like
cushy.
It's just, yeah. But I really do think it's, when you like that book, what doesn't kill us, about
Scott Carney,
Wim Hof.
Yeah.
I think people should read that. I'm reading the book right now that you recommended, The Molecule of More, about dopamine. And
what do you think?
It's really good so far. It's really good. I mean, it's no surprise, but it just it puts some science behind hunches that I had.
Yeah. And I think all of these are in concert. I mean, and to get back to the idea of the nature fix, I mean, there are heat shock proteins and cold shock proteins that happens when we're in extreme temperatures, or when we take a cold shower, and we activate brown fat when we're in the cold. And some of these can be mimicked through breath work or through just taking a cold shower. And it does just sort of change your brain and body state. And I think it makes, if I can stand in that cold shower, and we've got New York well water coming out of the tap, if I can stand in that for a minute and a half, 2 minutes in the morning, well, it makes the uncomfortable business call I might have to make seem a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I completely agree with all that. I mean, that's in some ways, that's the whole reason I do a lot of this stuff. Although I found the older I've gotten, I used to think, well, if I can go 100 miles on foot, I can do anything. But in some ways, going 100 miles on foot is so much simpler than like dealing with interoffice politics.
It's like, I agree.
I'm by myself. It's just, hey, eat right, take care of your feet, don't quit. Whereas when you're dealing with some of these people, whether it's work people or people, on the street, it's just the level of complexity goes up, and it's not just a simple formula. So
that hits home for me, but because I have a lot more troubles dealing with people than I do with myself. I'm curious, you have, and I know we're running close on time, but I have to ask this question because I was thinking about, you just kind of have this mindset that anything is possible. And I love this about you. And I was thinking about, have you ever read about the 4-minute mile? That they didn't think that the 4-minute mile could be, I think it's 4-minute mile, could be done. And then this man ran the 4-minute mile, and a month later, somebody beat his time and his time. And when we see what's possible, all of a sudden our idea of what we're capable of expands in that moment. But I feel like you have this inherent idea that anything is possible for your body and for your mind. And I think it fascinates me, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm very curious just in general, but I mean, I feel like a lot of this stuff, the stuff we've been talking about, has all kind of come together for me in the last 12 years, 13 years or whatever. I mean, I think I mean, pretty much everything we've discussed other than some of the mountain climbing stuff, like has happened in the last 12 or 13 years. And I think, where I grew up in North Carolina, there's just a very specific way people go about doing things. And nobody really does. Not many people do things differently than that. And I think it was probably when I met my wife, Kim, who all of a sudden I had the confidence to pursue things that may seem weird, because I wasn't worried about impressing anybody. Like I didn't need a girlfriend. I didn't give a shit. Like there was one person I cared about impressing, and it was her. And she, whatever I did, to limits. I mean, she'll call me out if I'm doing something stupid. Like when she found me passed out on the bathroom floor after holding my breath in the shower.
I like this story.
Yeah.
I like this story. This is why you don't do breath work in water specifically. I think there's disclaimers on all breath work.
I had this smashed up forehead to prove it. But, she just is very supportive of whatever I wanted to do and of me exploring these things. And so I think I'd always been curious, but maybe I didn't have the confidence to pursue different things. And I've found that, I found that I like to push myself, and I'm as surprised as anybody that people can do this stuff. Like I said, when I was hiking a 14er in Colorado, and these guys, I was generally pretty fast at hiking them, and there were some guys coming up behind me and they were faster than me. And I was like, what? Who are these guys? And we started talking at the summit. They were training for the Hard Rock 100, and they were telling me about the Hard Rock 100. And I thought, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. It's 100 miles. You go over 14. There's 34,000 feet of elevation gain. And I couldn't believe it. And I still think that's insane. But I would have never guessed that I would even be able to run 6 miles, much less go for 100 or climb up Denali or whatever. I mean, and so it's just this. It's more just interesting and surprising. And the fact that humans, especially a human like me, if you're willing to focus in, you can do all this cool stuff. I don't know. I mean, I really don't have a good answer for it. It's more just kind of confusion. And I read some book one time about happiness, and it said one of the keys to happiness is having very low expectations. So
I like that.
I think I've always just had low expectations of myself. And so whenever anything cool happens, I'm like, man, who would have ever guessed?
Yeah. I think every time I talk to you, I feel like you suffer a little bit from imposter syndrome, because I just think the way that you approach life is so admirable, and you seem to surprise yourself. And there's something really lovely about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that's what, with that thing at Ranchlands, the Strenuous Life Retreat. I mean, I didn't think a single person was going to sign up for that thing. And it sold out. It's sold out with a year out. And I keep telling those people, I'm like, I think there's a mistake here. And they're like, be quiet, Ed.
Yeah, be quiet, Ed. I want to come back just really quick, because I have to something you said, that your partnership with your wife sort of opened you up to possibility, to a different level of freedom. And I think I actually also share this, that I find that my marriage has opened up possibility for me. I'm not sure it's through not having to impress anybody other than Josh anymore, or what that is, but I really liked that was something that you mentioned. And I know that you and your wife are raising 2 great little girls.
Yeah. I like to think that I don't give a shit what anybody thinks about me, but I think first of all, everybody does, but I think probably I did before I met her. And then once I met her, I felt like I knew it was locked in. I knew we were going to get married. Like, she was with me with that health scare that I mentioned earlier. Like we got engaged soon after that. And all of a sudden I just felt like a freedom to be able to do whatever I wanted to do. Like, I mean, I think people may be interested, but like I quit drinking within a year of meeting my wife. And I think that I wasn't like an alcoholic or anything, but booze and I did not coexist well.
Yeah, booze and I don't. We also share that.
Yeah. And it's just, and I think, and that was not a big deal. Like, you hear these people who just struggle with alcohol and whatever. And it made me feel so shitty that like, I don't think I could have ever been an alcoholic just because how awful it made me feel. But it was like a dead weight, like you wake up hungover and then you miss a big chunk of the day. And so I was just like, all right, I'm done drinking. And she was like completely supportive. And I don't care if I go to a party and I'm not drinking, because the only person I care about impressing is my wife. And just little things like that build up, and just the support, she gives me for doing all these silly events and these, holding my breath. And, last winter, I decided I was going to run 1.3 miles every hour on the hour for 24 hours and then do a bunch of weird projects in between. And she's like, cool, do it. But like, when I have to take care of the kids and when I'm in family mode, I'm in family mode, and there's no bullshit. Like, she doesn't tolerate if I'm, their expectations that I'm not going to be selfish and that kind of thing. And sometimes, like this summer, some of the running stuff, it took too much time. But I think just having somebody who is going to support you. My parents are the same way, but I think it's different with a wife.
I think it's different with, that partnership. There's something really deep and really connected. There's just something different about it.
Yeah, there really is. I need to think in more detail about that, because I think it's pretty interesting. And I don't think everybody has that. So it's talking about it sometimes. I never want anybody to think that I'm like boasting about how, my great marriage or whatever. But I really do think, just like from a strictly a selfish standpoint, like having her support and kind of giving me the permission to go and do what I need to do to be a good version of myself. It's pretty awesome.
That's a really beautiful thing. And I think I don't view it as boasting. And I think like anything else that we've talked about on this podcast so far, I know that my marriage requires work, that this isn't something that has just fallen into my lap. This is something that Josh and I have put a lot of work into. Just like meditating, just like the food I eat, just like the exercise routine, or anything that takes discipline. I think that there has to be some of that discipline that happens within that marriage, that is principle in your life, and you work to keep it, and you work to keep it healthy.
Oh yeah. It doesn't just go in cruise control. And I think if it does, you're just kind of hoping that things work out. It's on some trajectory, and you just hoping that it's going to go where it needs to be. And it definitely takes focus, and it's added another level of complexity, when kids are involved. I mean, obviously I love it, but at the same time, they're the number one priority now. So that I think there's a lot of, you have to be very intentional about, kind of staying on the same page with all this stuff. But it's interesting. I mean, the whole thing is just so crazy. Everything is just so crazy. The fact that I have these two human beings that are mine, I still don't quite understand that.
I think about that. Josh and I have talked about having kids, and I think about that, and it feels unfathomable to be connected in genetic material, to have something beyond yourself that is also of yourself. I don't even know if I can explain it. And obviously I can't, because I don't have children, but wild. Yeah.
If it's the kind of thing you want to do, I highly recommend it. It's hilarious and crazy and rewarding and frustrating. I mean, it's the most, all these like cliches you hear people talk about, they're cliches for a reason, because they're, but it's cool.
I thought of you when I was reading the Strenuous Life speech. I thought about you because he talks about fatherhood kind of in a almost of the country sort of way, and just sort of what it means to embody being a man at that time. And again, let's set aside presentism. I really liked that. And he talks about that. And I saw a lot of you in it. And I have this, I think you should read that whole speech and put it out there, because I tend to want to listen to you talk. I don't think of you as having a North Carolina accent. You just have like that nice voice, like Sam Elliott.
I wish I had that stash. I wish I could do a stash like that.
You could. I think anything's possible, Ed. And I kind of just want you to read that whole speech and just put it out into the world. And so I'm encouraging everyone to go read that. But I do think that you embody so many of the principles that he lays forth, including just what it means to be a man and a father, and to bring that into a modern time too. Man, I appreciate. We need to do this like once a week, and you're making me feel so good. Yeah, we're going to get rid of that imposter syndrome. Okay, I have one last question for you that I'm going to ask everybody on this podcast. And I think we've in many ways really covered, maybe we've covered the answer. We've certainly covered components of how you think about life. But what does it mean for you to lay the groundwork? And it can be for anything. It can be for conservation. It can be for your personal life. It can be something bigger than you. I'd say, no matter what it is, professional stuff, personal stuff, athletic stuff, family stuff, I think it's that, what we talked about earlier, that consistency over an extremely long period of time. And I've been thinking about that a lot with my, being a dad, that, some of my buddies, I'm kind of late having kids. And so some of my buddies have kids that are teenagers, and some of them are doing awesome. And then some of them are struggling a little bit.
And, a lot of that's up to chance and genetics and, the whole thing about free will. But, when I think about my girls and being a dad, I think about, I got to be consistent every day over a long period of time, because like if one day, one of these girls has some issues that need to be addressed, like there ain't going to be a quick fix. Or if there is, like, I think being very focused on the kind of father I want to be, and then doing that every single day or as much as I possibly can to kind of keep the trajectory going in the direction I want. Because I think with people, it's very hard to do like hard turns, like in hard adjustments. Like I think everything moves very, very, very slowly, and it's built on one little thing after another. And whether, it's the same with meditation. If meditating one day or even for 2 weeks straight ain't gonna do anything for anybody, it ain't gonna help. But it's like actually going for 1 mile, going for a run, 3 mile run, and then not going again for 3 months, it ain't gonna be any help. But doing a little bit every single day over a long period of time, you can really build up some cool stuff. And so I would say that's, when I think of groundwork or like building a foundation, there's no quick, easy way. And I think my kind of possibly insane focus on doing a little bit consistently over a very long period of time, I think that's, for me, that's been a kind of a secret to making things happen. It's not really a secret because it's extremely hard for me to do, but where the stakes are the highest, which is with my kids and, family, I think there's no substitute for that. So that's kind of my mantra, is just a little bit every day for a very long period of time.
I don't think I could have dreamt up a better answer than that. I think that's wonderful. Do you want to wrap this up by telling people where they can find you?
Yeah. Best place is the website, mountainprairie.com. That gets you the podcast, my reading list, my good news email, any social media stuff. I'm trying to do some work on the website to make it a little more substantial. I'm going to try to be doing some more writing on there over the next 3 months. Although I'm trying to commit to it. Like if I do it, I got to do it every week for a certain period of time. So I haven't made that commitment yet, but yeah, podcast is on all the platforms. I'd love to hear from any of you, but I really appreciate you having me on. I don't feel like I'm qualified to be on here blabbing about myself, but it makes me feel good that you think I am. I got great admiration for everything you do.
We've had a lot of conversations over the years, and every time I always take something away, and I always take it away and it stays with me. Like you've given me a lot of gems, whether that's book recommendations or just life advice. And
I don't want right back at you.
Oh, thank you. I don't want people to miss out on all that good stuff that you have to offer.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Ed. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Groundwork Podcast. If what you heard today resonated with you, may I ask that you share it with your friends or leave us a review? This helps others find Groundwork. If you're looking for more, you can find us at groundworkcollective.com and at Groundwork Collective on Instagram. I would like to give a very special thank you to China and Seth Kent of the band All Right for clips from the beautiful song Over the Edge from their album, The Crucible. You can find them at All Right on Instagram and wherever you listen to music.